Thanks for tuning in to the Move Mind podcast. My guest this episode is Rob Nitman, a strength and conditioning coach based in Brighton, England, who has been working in the sports performance industry since 2014. Rob, thanks very much for coming on, mate.
No worries at all. Thank you for the offer.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Finally, we got around to it. I know we've been meaning to do this for a while, and it's finally aligned. Schedules are less hectic than ever before, so thank you very much for making some time. Appreciate that.
No, no worries at all. It definitely makes it easier now that we're in the same country.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And thanks to Zoom, we can do it. So let's start things off then, Rob. I guess getting into S&C as an industry, wanting to become a coach, how did all that kind of come about? Because strength and conditioning is its own branch, is its own field. Lots of people still don't even know what the term means. How did you come across it, get into it, and decide, right, that's a bit of me. That's what I want to do.
So I was basically during college, whilst I was at college, I was studying a BTEC in sport. Kind of decided that I wanted to get into coaching of some kind. Didn't really know what kind of coaching. Started doing a little bit of delving into different areas, and I was lucky enough to get a work experience placement at a professional rugby club for a week, and that was with the strength and conditioning team. So I went and I shadowed. I spent a week just sort of being a pest and also being a pair of hands. So just sort of asking questions, trying to help where I could to be an extra pair of hands for the coaches and the players. And then that kind of sparked my interest in S&C because I hadn't thought too much about it before that point, but that kind of like lit the fire, so to speak. And then I went to university to study sports coaching science because I'm not, and any of the athletes I work with will back this up, which is, I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm not the most scientific person in the world. I don't have the biggest brain, but I'm good at putting things into practice. So I chose sports coaching science rather than exercise science because I thought it would be too information heavy and I wouldn't come out of it with the grade that I wanted. Um, so yeah, sports coaching science, and during that was quite active with placements, and then off the back of that decided, yeah, S&C is what I want to do. Tried to get a job, failed miserably, as with everybody leaving university. So did as many voluntary things as I possibly could. Started working with university rugby teams, university American football teams, individuals who played different sports like lacrosse and hockey and other bits and bobs. And then in 2014, got an opportunity to go to Harlequins. I spent a year as an intern, and then from there, it kind of snowballed. Every other job I've had, all but one job I've had since then, has stemmed from that role where somebody had contacted me as a like via network and sort of said, "Are you interested in coming and working here?" And I've always said yes. So that's included a season overseas in New Zealand, included working at a private college down south, and then University of Brighton. Um, and then now, yeah, working for myself alongside my business partner Matt Dickens, and we're working to try and do what we can as a partnership to try and spread the gospel that is S&C. Because, as you said, not a lot of people really understand what it is, um, and a lot of people sort of give it that sort of highlight name of saying, "Oh, it's personal training," but for sports, and it's a lot more than that. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that because they don't have a reason to know why. So yeah, we're trying to do what we can to make people aware that it's not just for professional athletes, but it's for anybody who has any kind of interest in like improving their physical performance, whether that just be for health reasons or whether that be for sport.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Getting into the trenches early is definitely part and parcel of the process, isn't it? I mean, you said you listed a lot of placements there. That's vital, and everyone fails at getting the job once they come out of uni, which you hear all the time. Do you think you learnt more on your degree, or you learnt more doing those placements, or do you think that you need both?
I'd say I learnt more from placements, 100%, because you get an opportunity to actually apply and do the job that it is that you say you can do in the first place, right? So you get to try something out, see if it works. If it does, great. If it doesn't, make some amendments and go again. Um, I do, however, think that there does need to be a formal education process in there at some point. It doesn't necessarily mean university, it doesn't mean college, it could be something else. But I do think there needs to be some kind of proper education where you get an opportunity to learn the fundamentals, right? Because you need to know the science, you need to know the basics, because that's where the industry falls down. That's where other other individuals potentially give things a bad name because they don't necessarily have that same backing. Which is why I wonder why things like apprenticeships aren't a thing in our industry, because we have internships, but let's be honest, a lot of the time it's just free labor. You're there to do things that other people don't want to do, and you're there to do it for free, based off the fact that hopefully you develop some kind of network in the process. But if we had an apprenticeship program where, similar to being like a carpenter, you're a carpenter, you go to school for carpentry, and you go in a classroom for a day, and then the next day you're on site and you're learning how to apply it, and then you're back in the classroom, you're back on site. Why don't we have something like that, a little bit more formal? It doesn't have to be in the process of like a work experience placement at university, because that's 6 weeks plus where you just go out and learn some stuff. But it's, why can't it be a melded model where we get a little bit of both at the same time, and an opportunity to actually figure out where you sit within the industry, where you sit within the role, and if it's actually what you want to do or not. Because a lot of times people go to university, do a course, thinking that's what they want to do. They go and get a job, and then they're like, actually, this is terrible. I don't want to do this ever again. Whereas with an apprenticeship style model, you'd get an opportunity to do that and figure it out for yourself in the process, I think.
100%, yeah. And the trades have proven that, haven't they? Like you mentioned there, the trades have proven that. And it's so interesting. I've talked about this a few times with previous guests, how many people do come out with letters and absolutely zero people skills. And, perhaps no fault of their own, but they haven't had a chance to play with that. Like you said, they haven't had a chance to go out and test it in tandem with their education. And I think that's doing coaches a great disservice. I've gone the other way around. I've just spent the last 6-7 years just coaching. And now I'm doing my formal education and topping that up. And I'm really enjoying it, doing the formal education. I've also got a little bit of experience to apply the knowledge that I'm learning to now. I've got case studies in my head, right? I'm also in the gym every day now, reinforcing the information that I'm learning formally. But I agree with you in the sense that the apprenticeship model is powerful, and it's the ability specifically to test and retest during the course that it gives you that immersive learning. And I think you can learn to coach and learn to read textbooks simultaneously. I don't think that's too demanding at all. I think if anything, you're actually going to learn it all better, because you've now got a sort of a 3D model, haven't you? A 360 view of what's going on.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, one of the things I did in my previous role at the University of Brighton was I ran essentially a CPD for people who were studying strength and conditioning. So they had an opportunity to come and work on some of our programs. So coach the rugby team, coach basketball, coach football, hockey, netball, whatever it is, and some of our scholarship athletes. And each week we'd sit down and be like, right, what don't you understand? What is it from within this realm of strength and conditioning? What do you need me to help bolster? And it was like, right, well, I know how to write a program, but I don't know, like, how should that look? What is periodization? How can I go from how can I write a 12-month program? And so actually giving them the opportunity to do that, and then send them away and say, right, cool, well, here's a men's rugby team who play in a league where if we make mistakes, it's not the end of the world. So just try it, see what happens. And they come up with some wacky ideas, which if I was their head coach at a Premiership rugby team, I'd be like, no, there's no way in hell we're doing that. But realistically, here you can be like, yeah, screw it, try it, why not? And then ultimately they learn, because they're like, oh, that didn't work, that was terrible, and then they never do it again, which is far better than me just shutting them down and saying, no, you're stupid. Like, they've got to make mistakes and then learn from them, because that's the only way we learn as humans, and that's what we've been told time and time again. Yet none of our education systems give us an opportunity to do that.
It's so true, isn't it? It's like we need the padded walls version of being able to coach and make mistakes without it costing us a £7 million hamstring, in a way that we can learn viscerally from those mistakes. It's true. It's so counter sort of the knowledge, the science there, isn't it? We need to learn from mistakes, and yet we're banned from making them. It's kind of crazy, really. And I can see why, coaches struggle to kind of get that experience. In fact, everyone that I speak to that's really experienced in coaching has to have that experience of like 10, 15, 20 years behind them, because the education setup isn't really backing them in that sense, right? They literally have to accrue 2 decades worth of mistakes, not maybe fully of mistakes, let's say 5 to 10 years of mistakes, and then they're in a place where they can actually be at the forefront of their industry, when actually I reckon we could cut that right down. I reckon we could get that down to a couple of years and produce much better coaches with the formal education behind them.
Yeah, and interestingly, that like the final part you said there, produce better coaches, is that a lot of the time the coaches who've been through those cycles of they've been to university, they've learned all the science, and they then have those reflective practices, and a lot of the time you hear it on all the podcasts about S&C and whatever else. The biggest thing you always hear is you need to learn to coach the person, or you need to learn to coach the team, and it's all about interpersonal skills. It's not necessarily about the science, because ultimately the vast majority of people who come out of university systems, whether you went to Loughborough, whether you studied in America, whether you went to like the University of Butlins, which was Worcester, like I did, ultimately you learn the same science because it's the same textbooks. So, but what makes one person more successful than the other is the fact that I now, working with individuals in the private setting, I can actually have a conversation with them. I can get to know them on a deeper level, and those are the things which they don't necessarily teach you, and it takes you a longer time to learn. Because ultimately, if you're working in a professional rugby club, it's fitter, faster, stronger, and slightly bigger, so that you don't get injured. Like that's what we're aiming for, and everybody just has a slightly different way of doing it. But it's how to then actually get the players to buy into it. How can the players enjoy that? Because it is their job, and it does get painful. They do get to a point where they don't want to do it. So how can you make them come back day to day? Well, get to know them, understand what makes them tick, and that's where coaching comes in instead of sports science.
Yeah, 100%, the interpersonal skills. And maybe we'll see in the future on formal education processes that there is a topic or section, or arguably a parallel skill set being taught of interpersonal skills in the modules. Because, like you say, if you haven't got buy-in, you haven't got anything, actually. You've just got science. And that's not enough to get what we need to stick with the athletes. Any moments that you had to deliberately spend on creating buy-in in your history as a coach that resulted in getting buy-in, and you were like, oh my god, this worked, this was the last piece of the puzzle?
Um, the biggest thing for buy-in for me is understanding why. Sometimes the places where I've struggled the most with buy-in is where it's a group setting, right? Because you've got in a group setting where, so let's say as an example, the men's rugby team at the university, some of the players absolutely love S&C. You get your meatheads in every team, and especially in a rugby environment, there's plenty of them. But then you also get the ones who are like, no, lifting weights is dumb. I don't want to do it. I don't want to wake up at 7 o'clock and come lift weights on a Monday morning, whatever. And I get it, but at the same time, yeah, that's a different argument for a different day. But like creating buy-in there, it's then trying to almost use the leadership qualities of the other people within the team to drag up those who don't necessarily see it. Because if I'm just there shouting, you need to do S&C because I'm the S&C coach and I said so, they're not going to listen to me, because it's just me beating a drum and trying to show how good I am. Whereas if they listen to the person within their own team who they think, they see them as a strong ball carrier, or they're fit, or they're whatever it is, if they're a leader within that team, they're more likely to listen to them than they are to me. So it's kind of was, yeah, it was one of the things I came to with that, is using that person as the figurehead rather than using myself as the figurehead, because they want to be seen as useful amongst their peers. They don't care if they look useful to me, because in 3 years' time I won't know who they are, because they'll have left and I'll have another one in. Whereas those peers who they spend 3 years with, and they spend a lot of time with them, that's probably going to be their friendship group for a long period of their life. So they don't want to be seen as like the time waster, the one who didn't try hard. So they're more likely to work for those than they are for me. So that was probably one relatively good scenario, I hope.
Yeah, very cool insight. Very interesting. Almost delegate it to the current figureheads rather than trying to become a figurehead yourself. Smart, super smart. They've already got buy-in with the people they like and their friends, right? They've already got rapport. They've already done all the things you're trying to do, turning up to a fresh team. And now you can kind of slipstream that and get them to kind of do the brunt, almost by sort of letting them lead by example. Yeah, because if the captain of the team is stoked about lifting, and wants to get it done, he's going to do your sales for you, isn't he? Really? Yeah, very interesting.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah, 100%.
yeah, that's very cool. Now I know you're into your jiu-jitsu as well. Big part of why I wanted to get you on the show today for expertise relating to the fantastic arts of murder yoga and the like. Currently blue belt, am I correct in thinking?
Yeah, blue belt under Yusuf Nabi at Elements Jiu Jitsu in Brighton.
Lovely. Yes. Oh yeah, I remember Yusuf. Yeah, wicked. He's a savage in the gi department amongst others. How did you get into jiu-jitsu? I mean, it's a pretty bizarre, again, like S&C, like not many people, I guess a few more people are coming around to it now with the likes of UFC and MMA and stuff, but still a kind of bit of a tangential martial art. Most people know the karates, the taekwondos, kickboxing and boxing even perhaps more popular. How did you come across the jiu-jitsu realm?
So, the first time I ever got any exposure to it, I used to work years back during that middle period between finishing university and getting my internship. I worked as a doorman, and one of the guys I worked on the door with used to compete in Vale Tudo, and so he was very big on every Saturday morning we would do a session as a group of doormen where it was essentially like self-defense, but to essentially so that he had confidence that I'd be able to help him out if he was in trouble, and so that I had confidence that he could help me out if I was in trouble. So it was simple grappling techniques, just basically how to understand and how to manipulate somebody's body weight so that we could create, stop problems if they occurred on the door. And then that basically turned into us deciding we'd just do some like really, really crappy level MMA in a gym in Worcester with some shoddy gloves on. And then I took a massive hiatus from it during the whole time that I was doing my internships and whatever. And I never did anything serious then. Like it was just like a couple of really basic grapples, just learning how to understand bodies. And then I worked at a gym down south a few years back, and as part of the gym, you got a free gym membership, and you could attend any classes. And they started doing jiu-jitsu, and I was like, oh, I'm actually not working at the time they're doing this, so maybe I'll give it a go. And then the typical cliche, went to one session and was like, yep, cool, I'm into this. Went and bought a gi, bought a rash guard that was actually a brown rank rash guard because I had no understanding of ranks and why rash guards were a thing. So turned up in that the next session, and my coach told me to throw it in the bin because I'm not a brown belt. And I was like, it's just a piece of lycra. And he was like, no, can't wear that. So then, so that was fun. And then, yeah, just kind of carried on since then, and obviously had the stoppages for COVID and had a couple of stoppages for injuries, but largely 2 or 3 times a week, every week since late 2017, I think it was.
Fantastic. That's really cool.
Mm.
And how far into your white belt journey was it then you got promoted, roughly?
Just under 2 years.
Yeah, fantastic. So there you go. So that's a good frequency, isn't it? On average, 2 to 3 days a week, couple of years, and then blue belts usually start to come about, which is cool.
Mm.
Yeah, very cool. And what was it about, like you said, your first session, you're like, yeah, I'm into this. What was it about that first kind of session that captivated your attention? Was it the fact that there was like strength and physics in action? Was it the fact that you could learn how to crush people? Was it that you were getting crushed by smaller people and were baffled as to how?
Option D, all of the above. So largely, I'm a competitive person. Always have been, always will be. Most of my athletic background was playing rugby, and when I obviously moved into internships, didn't have time to. So it kind of took that on. It took on that competitive edge. It gave me a competitive outlet where you can be aggressive, you can let out some physical steam, but also, like you said, all the mental side of it. Learning new skills, learning new athletic demands, as well as the mental skills, and learning new patterns and all of those kinds of bits, as well as just sort of having those days where some sort of 60 something kilo person wraps you up and puts a bow around you, and you're like, hang about, this shouldn't happen. And obviously it's still happening on a twice or 3 times a week basis. And that's kind of one of those things where you're like, right, well, this clearly works because I see myself being the dominant person against another, yet I am clearly being dominated by somebody else. And it's this, I like the constant pursuit of it. There's always something to learn. You can never you can never go backwards, really.
Yeah, it's too wide of a wormhole to get stagnant, really, as long as you're turning up. And then I guess on that note, Rob, any kind of landmarks in your own learning for jiu-jitsu that created light bulb moments for you? Was there any processes that you've gone through that have helped with your learning? Is it just a case of turning up and just being consistent and going to class? Or was there any moments when you're like, okay, this is starting to stick now?
The biggest one for me was going from doing 2 sessions a week to doing 3,
Ah, okay, nice.
which I'm not like, I know a lot of the other podcasts you hear talk about you should take a training journal and write down whatever it is you've learned and any reflections. I don't do that because I've got too much other stuff going on in my brain already, and
Got
it would
enough
just
training
probably,
journals for everybody
yeah,
else that you train, yeah.
yeah, probably make me explode. So I I'm not great at retaining information. So going more regularly gives me an opportunity to retain it by doing it. And
Yeah,
we
okay.
at Elements we work on a curriculum. So it's sort of, at the moment we're doing a month of work from mount. So it's 2 weeks of mount attacks and then 2 weeks of mount defense. So you get an opportunity, if you're going 3 times a week, you're going to do the same attacks multiple times. You're going to do the same types of defenses multiple times. It gives you an opportunity to actually pattern them and to actually learn them in action, so that then in like 6 months' time, when we're back to doing some kind of single leg X, because Yusuf loves single leg X, and somebody gets to my back, which inevitably will happen because we have lots of back takers in our gym, I might actually remember how to defend myself because it's been patterned, it's been ingrained throughout this month. So I think for me, yeah, just going in 3 times a week, like that extra 1 session a week really made a difference in terms of retaining the information for me, because it was just added an extra 50% of training time.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I suppose it does if you look at it as a pure ratio, doesn't it? Yeah,
mm,
it really does. And then, yeah, it's very interesting you say that 2 to 3 because I've seen that, not so golden ratio, but I've seen that pop up in lots of places, especially with skill development and strength training. I've seen my clients literally watch the progress increase from training twice a week for a year or two and then jumping up to 3 and being like, holy shit, why didn't I do this earlier? Noticed it
mm,
myself for jiu-jitsu going from 2 days a week up to, yeah, increasing from there. And I suppose out of a 7 day cycle, if you're training 3 times, there's only 4 days off as opposed to 5, and 5 days is a working week off. So by increasing, like you say, by 50%, you can increase recall by doing. I like that. I like that. I think that's a great idea for people listening. If you're not a textbook recaller and you don't have that kind of photographic visual memory that we wish we could all have, then it's just do it more and space your repetition in such a fashion that you're not gonna forget as much. And I'd say 3 times a week is kind of the magic number there, isn't it? It's a practical lifestyle number too if you're working, and you've got family commitments and relationship and stuff like that. But it's yeah, it goes a long way. It's really interesting you say that.
yeah, that's exactly it. 3 times a week is perfect for me, because twice a week over the last month or so I've been really busy work wise, and I was only able to get in once or twice a week, and I really felt like I'd gone stagnant. The information wasn't sticking. I felt like people who I'd normally be dominant over were starting to dominate me, and I was like, what's going on? And it just triggered in my head. I was like, oh, it's because I'm not doing it so much, I'm just out of practice. But similar to what you said, I'd love to go more often. I'd love to get in 4 or 5 times a week, but realistically right now it's just not doable. Like I'm developing a new business. I've got a certain amount of clients I have to service every week. I also actually really love spending time with my wife. Believe that or not, So I want to spend time at home, and then I have online clients and everything else. So 3 times a week is perfectly doable. So I stick with that. As and when I get an opportunity to do a fourth or a fifth, then great. But realistically, right now, that's all I can manage. So I just have to, it's all about doing the best with what you've got, right? So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, you can go far with 3 times a week and just making it smart and really applying yourself to those like sessions. Some of the most successful people I've met aren't necessarily the most time liberal people. In fact, they're the opposite. They only have an hour or two at a time to dedicate to the things that they want to improve in. I noticed this in the rock climbing world. There's a couple of pilots that used to come in, and they only used to come in like twice a week for like 2 hours, almost to the minute. And you could just tell they were successful people. You could just tell the way they carried themselves, the way they sort of were polite and engaged with people, friendly, but not, they didn't lurk. They were there to
Hmm.
train. They were there to rock climb, and they were in and they were warmed up and they were on the wall and they would just smash it for those 2 hours. And they would do 3 times the work that lots of other people would do that would be there for 6 hours.
Hmm.
And they'd only come twice a week, and their progress in the time that I was there for 7, 8 months, I just watched them improve, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. These aren't even like, these are hobbyist rock climbers, and they are overtaking every other hobbyist rock climber by doing a third of the volume, just by being smart in the way they approach that. So it's fascinating to see that. Wanted to pick your brains then a little bit deeper, Rob, on the S&C side of things for jiu-jitsu. Obviously, it's there's 2 areas there that are close to both of our hearts. And since putting the word out that we were going to do this show, lots of people have been stoked on information to do with those two topics, and specifically, which we can get into shortly, peaking for competition, peaking for jiu-jitsu competition, and how one should go about that with regards to S&C and what your time looks like in the weight room and on the mats and stuff like that. I wondered, maybe let's start just kind of your overall, I guess, coach's philosophy and ideas around S&C for Jiu-Jitsu. Why is it a good idea to do it if people aren't even familiar with the link between the two? From a coach's perspective, why bother with strength and conditioning for Jiu-Jitsu at all? And if you are going to bother, where would you kind of start?
Ultimately, why bother? Because it's like the old fable about the three piggies. Which one had the house that survived? The one that was made of hay, the one that was made of wood, or the one that was made of brick? You want the house that's made of brick. So ultimately, the stronger foundation you have and the stronger system you have, the less likely that system is to break. And that's ultimately where I see S&C fitting into any sport. It doesn't necessarily mean grappling, but it does also correlate into grappling perfectly, because you think about the types of movements we have, and you just have to look at the fingers of the Meow brothers to understand what I'm talking about, because jiu-jitsu is a very physical sport, and it will leave you with physical ailments unless your body is able to tolerate the demands that is placed upon it. And that's where S&C fits in. We're here not to make you better at the sport itself, but to make you better at handling the physical demands that that sport places upon you. And that's where a lot of people get it wrong, in my opinion. They start trying to mimic the sport in the gym. It's not about that. Your sport practice is about your sport practice. S&C is about making you physically more capable. So the best place to start for me is start with the basics. The good thing about jiu-jitsu is that you can take part in it at any age. Right? I properly started it when I was 27 or 28. Already had one surgery to my name, quickly had a second due to another accident that was not jiu-jitsu related. So we'll clear that up before anybody thinks that that's to blame. But like now, I've had 2 surgeries and I've got a knee that locks up on me regularly, but I can still go and do jiu-jitsu whenever I want. And now it's about me protecting my body and getting into a position where I can take it forward. So I know a lot of people who started a lot later than me. I've got a training partner who's in his late 50s, and he's a blue belt the same as I am. So, and there was a video that went around this past weekend of a 70-something-year-old getting his black belt. And you're like, that's exactly what it's about. So it's about them protecting that person through that whole life cycle on the mats. So strength is ultimately the foundation for all athletic performance, again, in my opinion, because if you're stronger, you can be more powerful, because you can create more force and you can tolerate more force being placed upon you. And then strength also then correlates into other areas, like being able to be physically fitter. I think strength is the underlying foundation. So learning different movement patterns: squat, hinge, push, pull, carry, whatever else you want to throw in there, crawl, roll, tumble, jump, sprint. Just doing all of the basics, but to a very, very high standard, is absolutely where you should start. People get caught up on this because they look at the likes of Gordon Ryan and they see what he's doing now. Actually, he's probably a bad example because he basically just does bodybuilding. But let's say he does something different to that, like somebody at the top of their game. They look at what they're doing now and they try to emulate it, but it's not about that. You should be looking at what they did 10 years ago. Like if you're a white belt, don't look at what a black belt's doing. Look at what that black belt did when they were a white belt, because you want to emulate their journey, and you're not where they are. And everybody starts with the basics, or should, because otherwise you see things start to go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. The adage of the ingredients of squat, hinge, push, pull is the beginnings, isn't it? And they'll carry you through for a lifetime of just foundational sort of generalities, won't they? Really, and you can always improve upon those. And I think that is starting to bleed through the sort of as the zeitgeist now into the jiu-jitsu world a little bit more than it has anyway. Certainly more than it has 5 years ago, let's say. I remember reading articles coming out in Jiu-Jitsu magazine that were sort of like, what is strength and conditioning, and should you do it? Because Marcelo Garcia didn't, and it was just like it was a bit of more of a nebulous topic. Now, all the gyms I've visited in the last few years, S&C is more of a household name, and I think
Mm.
those basics, the GPP work as we know it to be in our world, people are getting that a little bit more.
Mm.
But where there seems to be more confusion is what kind of training makes up the basics, because we know you can perform a squat heavily that would mimic that of a power lifter. We know that you could do a clean that would mimic that of an Olympic weightlifter. We know that you could do bicep curls that would mimic that of a bodybuilder. And you could argue, well, these are all kind of basic patterns, maybe perhaps not the bicep curls, but you know what I mean. But there's lots of ways to emulate it, and some ways might be more useful than others. In my experience, lots of people mimic powerlifting programs thinking they're doing S&C for jiu-jitsu. Why might that not be the best use of their time, do you think?
Because ultimately, a lot of powerlifting programs and other programs like that, your Olympic weightlifting, your bodybuilding, your CrossFit, whatever it is, they are designed for that purpose. If you want to be a powerlifter, you do a powerlifting program. If you want to be a bodybuilder, you do a bodybuilding program. Now, there isn't such a thing, or there kind of are. People sell them, myself included. Like, where you can go and you can buy a grappling S&C program, but the sport itself isn't in the gym, and that's where the difference is. So, like we said before, not mimicking BJJ actions within the gym is not necessarily something you should do, especially as a beginner. Maybe as you get further down the line, but that's another topic. So, realistically, a powerlifting program is going to absolutely fry your nervous system if you're doing it properly. It's going to completely wipe you out, and that is not why you are going to the gym. If you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner, you're going to the gym to enhance your physical abilities, to make you better at jiu-jitsu, and to keep you healthy, to stay on the mat. Doing like whatever the crazy volume is that some powerlifting programs are going to put you through, it will make you stronger, yes, but it's going to leave you so beat up and so sore that that's going to put you at risk of injury, because you're going to have like localized muscle soreness. That's going to cause stiffness, and that's going to mean you can't move properly, and that's when somebody puts you in a crappy armbar and something might go pop. If you were to follow a program without such levels of volume and intensity, then hopefully it won't put such a dramatic amount of load through your body that it doesn't cause you an injury. And that's where I see the difference taking place, is that you need to remember that you want to keep the goal. And if your goal is jiu-jitsu, you don't need to be a powerlifter to be good at jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a subtle, it's a subtle thing to actualize, but a pretty obvious thing to hear. But I know so many people that just do powerlifting programs thinking that they're doing S&C. And I think that's because powerlifting is associated with being strong. And arguably, off-season work isn't, for S&C off-season work, for jiu-jitsu, for wrestling, isn't too different from the naked eye to a powerlifter training to get stronger for powerlifting. But I guess the difference there is we're only going to do it as grapplers for a short period of time, so that we can then go on to other things, which is what I want to ask you next. Once we've built that strength foundation of those basics, would we still be doing strength work a week before our competition? Let's say you and I are competing in a couple of weeks at the end of August, and we've got a little regional tournament, like so many people listening to this podcast sign up for. Should we be doing our sort of strength work leading up to that, or should we take a different approach that would perhaps get us more ready for that competition? What's some advice you've got around that? Because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Now, in my opinion, there are basically two different schools of thought here. The one school of thought is, yes, you taper, right? So you do what you were doing if you were, say you're in athletics, your big event is probably once a year you have some big summer tournament or whatever it might be, some summer games. So over the course of the months leading up to it, you gradually reduce the volume and then you gradually reduce the intensity so that as you're doing less work, your nervous system gets a chance to recover and you're hopefully at your absolute peak physical performance on the day that you compete. That's essentially what tapering is. It's giving your body an opportunity to recover so that on game day, you're good to go. You're not sore, you're not stiff, you're not stressed. All you've got to think about is go out there and try and take someone's back and check them out, right? The other school of thought is, in my opinion, the difference between these two is how regularly you compete. If you're someone who competes 2 or 3 times a year at the big events, say you do the English Open, the British Open, and I don't know, one of the IBJJFs, then they're the type of person who should probably taper because they have key points in their timeline, especially if they're relatively well spread out. If they're like, say, March, August, and November, perfect. Taper for those events because you've got a big amount of time to actually make physical change before you then taper back down. If you're the type of person who's competing every month or even more, like some people do, I see some people who compete basically every other weekend, then there's no point in tapering because you never give yourself an opportunity to make progress. Because the big thing is that further away from competition, you don't necessarily have to worry about your jiu-jitsu performance per se, as long as you're not one of those people who has a massive gym ego, because that's the time when you can make physical change in terms of strength, in terms of power, in terms of your conditioning, because you can afford to be a little bit frazzled and still be okay on the mats because it doesn't matter so much. Whereas at competition time, you can't be frazzled whatsoever. So if you're competing every other week, you can't be competing and then be absolutely frazzled, then recover, and then compete, then frazzled, then recover, because you're just going to go up to come down to go back to the middle again. And we want to not get you back to the middle. We want to get you a step higher than that. So in those situations, it's just being smart about manipulating your program so that you can continue to train through the competition cycle and make really gradual, steady improvements that won't necessarily make you look at the program and be like, oh, cool, I've made 20 kilo PR on my bench press or whatever it is. But it might mean that over the 3 or 4 month period, even when you have been competing, you might have still added weight to it, just not a massively significant amount. So small and steady progress over time, which is going to leave you less sore, less stiff, less central nervous system sort of frazzle, for lack of a better word, less tiredness, and then go into those competitions just as part of your regular training week.
Yes. Okay. Very interesting. So you have to be. The first question is then how much are you competing out of a 12-month period? That's interesting because jiu-jitsu is so unique is that it's not even like wrestling. Like we don't even have the season. It's literally like ad hoc tournaments as and when organizers put them together, right? And it seems like that the world over. Apart from, like you say, the big sort of landmark comps where people do travel internationally for, usually variations on the Opens or the Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
The regionals is where 90% of jiu-jitsu practitioners do their competing because they're hobbyists and they make up the majority of the sport, right? And part of the goal for setting up the Move Mind project was to assist with people that want to take their hobby seriously enough to get something out of it and see progress. But often the information is geared towards the professional athlete and not so much towards the hobbyist. So I like the fact that you've decided there's a starting point, figure out how much you're competing on a 12-month cycle. That's really powerful. So I guess by definition then, hobbyists, you're probably going to fall more into the latter category where you might be competing more often. I mean, maybe not. Maybe you're just doing 1 or 2 a year. But if you are a competitive soul, then you're probably going to go maybe 4, 5, maybe 10 comps a year. I'm trying to set myself a goal of like 5 to 10 a year. Trying to get 5 in before Christmas. So in which case then it becomes about the second part of your answer, managing your variables a bit more so that perhaps the gains are a bit slower over time, but you're also not too fried out to compete. So is that just a case of being smart then on load selection, volume intensity relationships, and kind of not expecting to PR every session?
Yeah, essentially that. So one final little clarity point on that last bit. If you are the type of person who competes all the time, but still also does those big landmarks, and like those are the points in your year where you really care, So like one of the guys I've worked with previously, Ollie Webb, he competes at any opportunity he can get because he just bloody loves it. And Yusuf likes him competing. So any opportunity he gets, he'll compete. But then there are certain times of the year where he's like, right, no gi Europeans. I need to be on tip top form. So we'll taper for that. But the rest of the time, we just work through and just treat it like he's going to like a Saturday sparring session. So that's just a little caveat to that last point. But for this other one, in terms of that taper, yeah, essentially the first thing you want to do with that taper, realistically, is reduce the volume. And the volume is the amount of work that you are doing. So whether that be you cut down from doing 3 sessions to doing 2, that will realistically mean you're probably lifting anywhere between 6 tons to 15 tons less work in a given week than you were the week before, depending on what your program looks like. And that's a lot of work. So you've just taken off essentially a third of your working week immediately, job done. So that's going to create you a lot of room for your central nervous system to recover. So volume should be the first thing that decreases. And then from there, the intensity, normally when the volume decreases, the intensity increases. So you're going to go from, so volume for those people who might not necessarily know, let's say we're doing 5 sets of 8. That's a lot of work. Then it might be the next week you're doing 5 sets of 6. That's slightly less work. And then it might be 5 sets of 4. Then it might be 4 6s, then 4 4s, then it might be 3 6s, 3 4s. That's a reduction in volume. As you are reducing that volume, the intensity increases because you can do a lot more weight for 4 reps than you can for 6 reps. So as one comes down, the other goes up. And then as you get closer to the competition again, because we want that nervous system to recover and get us what's called a supercompensation effect, you need to reduce intensity again to give the body an opportunity to recover. Now, normally for me, when I program for people who are tapering or peaking for a competition, that will essentially be the week of. And that week of will still get them in to train because I don't like changing their routine, because sometimes a change of routine for people can increase anxiety and they start to feel like they're not necessarily prepared or whatever it is. Some people just don't like change. So instead of coming in and doing something really heavy, really aggressive, we come in and it'll be a little bit more circuit based, where we increase the heart rate a little bit. They're not lifting anything particularly heavy, but at the end of the session, they feel like they've done a good amount of work, but it won't necessarily leave them feeling absolutely goosed the next day. One of those sessions where if you asked for an RPE at the end of the session, they'd probably give it a 7, 6 or a 7. But the next day, if you asked them again, they'd probably say it was like a 3 or a 4, because that perception, and they're like, oh, actually, yeah, it was pretty easy compared to what we did a few weeks ago. That's exactly where you want to be that week before competition. You want to tick over, doing enough where you're getting some kind of stimulus, but not enough where it's going to leave you absolutely battered.
Yeah, absolutely. And in order to see that from an objective metric standpoint, you do kind of have to understand what you're doing in a total session and then how to reduce that, right? Which, like you eloquently put there, for people that might not understand, just looking at your sets and rep numbers will give you a good idea on sort of total repetitions, your total volume for that session. So that number should go down. That number should go down, and the feeling, your RPE, the feeling of that session, especially the morning after, shouldn't feel as high as perhaps you normally feel. Yeah, you should be able to come out of it okay. And I'll tell you how you should be able to come out of it. You should be able to come out of it and go and do positional sparring and not dread the fact that you're going to go and do positional sparring. You should be like, no, I can handle this. This is no problem. Not like, oh my God, I'm bagged. I'm not going to be able to do 4 rounds of half guard or whatever it is.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
so that really helps then on the sort of the tapering front in the weight room. Now, where would you place conditioning into that? Does conditioning come into that idea of reducing the kind of volume and maintaining or increasing intensity up to the week before? Is it separate, or do you think that doing conditioning in the weight room is kind of pointless and you should just get your conditioning on the mats when it comes to jiu-jitsu competition?
Largely the latter. I'm a big believer that the sport is ultimately the best preparation you can get for the sport is doing the sport, right? So the most prepared for jiu-jitsu you will be is by doing more jiu-jitsu. So going and doing sparring is the most specific thing you can do for competition prep, especially if you have a gym like at Elements on a Saturday. They do competition class, and they'll get everybody sat around the mats, and like they'll get one match going on in the middle, they'll set the timer and everybody will be cheering and it'll feel like a competition. You get that kind of anxiety before you go in. When Yusuf calls you out, you're like, oh God, okay, like game on. That's the most specific you can get. But there's a caveat. If one of your weaknesses is your gas tank, then you can't necessarily just rely on jiu-jitsu to do that. It's like having, say you're terrible at maths and you need to get a C at GCSE, you get a maths tutor. So your maths tutor in this scenario is going to the gym and riding the air bike, or going to the gym and using like the rower or the ski, or going for a run or going for a swim, whatever it is, something that's going to test your heart and lungs and improve their ability to do their job. Because if you're unfit, you're going to get found out pretty fast, right? And that's coming from me as an ultra heavyweight. So, I'm allowed to be a little unfit because most of the other people are far worse than me. So if your weakness is your gas tank, you need to work on it, whether that be more rounds on the mats, which is, in my opinion, should be your priority. As long as you can handle it, then do that as your number one. If not, then do some in the gym. And in my opinion here, this is where sometimes it gets a little bit messy, is that my opinion is that you should plug the gaps with something that doesn't look like what you're already doing. So in jiu-jitsu, it's relatively anaerobic, short, sharp bursts, and then you get a little bit of an opportunity to catch your breath. Then you've got to go full out again in a scramble. Then you get a chance to catch your breath. Then a referee stands you up and you've got to shoot another takedown. Then you catch your breath and wait for your points. And then it's always stop, start, stop, start. It's very rarely a very consistent pace for 6 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever your rounds are. So I like to supplement the conditioning front with more aerobic work. Aerobic exercise is going to improve your ability to recover between sets or between rounds. It's going to improve your ability to reduce your heart rate during your work periods, and it's going to improve your ability to recover between training days. So in my opinion, that should be the foundation for conditioning, as long as it's something that you need on the side of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, very interesting. And then so with regards to aerobic work there, then would you say that's aerobic in terms of steady state, or would you say it's aerobic in terms of aerobic power work? Could it be either, I guess, depending on what your holes are?
Yeah, either. So again, if we're looking at the tapering example or a peaking example, further away from the competition, it'll be more low intensity, steady state. So it'll be 20 minutes keeping your heart rate between 120, 150, somewhere in a kind of green zone, yellow zone, where you could still have a conversation. If you don't have a heart rate monitor, I like to use something called the Mark Wahlberg rule. Because if you ever watch a Mark Wahlberg movie, he for some reason is always ever so slightly out of breath. And that's exactly where you want to be for your aerobic work.
Excellent.
It's like even Ted, where he's just sat on a sofa getting high with a teddy bear, he's somehow out of breath. I don't really understand it, but it's that kind of pace where you have to take a breath every few words, right? That's the kind of space you need to be at when you're doing your aerobic work, if you don't have a heart rate monitor. But most people have an Apple Watch or whatever it is these days. So that'll be 20 plus minutes sitting sort of in that 120 to 150 type zone. Then the mid stage, I would go into intervals where it's a minimum of a 2-to-1 work to rest ratio. So as an example, that would be 2 minutes of work to 1 minute of rest. You're working for longer than you are resting. Ideally, you'd look at that as a 3-to-1 ratio. So 3 minutes of work, 1 minute of rest. That's a really good opportunity, because you have to go back to working when you're not quite fully recovered, but you're not working at a maximum output. So again, you're looking at that sort of 6 or 7 out of 10, maybe 7 to 8 out of 10 at an absolute top. So it's hard work, but it's not the kind of hard work where you get to the end of the 3 minutes and you're like, oh, I could not do another 10 seconds if I tried. It's the kind of 3 minutes where you get to the end of it and you're like, oh, I've probably got another minute in me, something like that. And then as you get even closer, that's where you start to look at the aerobic power. If aerobic is the only thing you're looking at, that's when you do aerobic power, which is work up to about 90% of your heart rate, see how quickly you can get it back down to 60, and repeat that. So just zigzag up to 90, down to 60, up to 90, down to 60. Give your heart the opportunity to recognize that you need to recover, and you need to recover fast, because ultimately in a competition, normally you get at least a 1 fight break, but sometimes, depending on the competition, you might not. right? And on sparring rounds, you might not. So if you need to be able to bring your heart rate down as quickly as possible. Aerobic power is the way to do that. It's at that point, if we were working with an athlete who was peaking or tapering, I would then transition into anaerobic power, which is more really, really short, high intensity intervals with a long rest period in between. So it's sort of your 5 seconds of maximum output work to 25 seconds of active recovery. And that's more what you'd see for like an MMA fighter, a boxer, a rugby player, where it's a bit more intermittent. Whereas jiu-jitsu, I feel like you get more bang for your buck by doing the aerobic work.
Very interesting. Yeah, because of the nature of the sport, because of the nature, especially with gi, friction, bursts to change position and then establishing position and maintaining it. Usually heart rate drops. No gi can go either way, can't it? Sometimes it can be a flurry of scrambles. Sometimes it can be a bit more steady, but again, it's that like you say, that kind of, there's a spike to it. Bit different to the MMA, bit different to the boxing. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, that's a really nice model there on the conditioning side. I'm also a fan of getting most of the conditioning on the mat. I think it can be done. I really do. And I just think you have to have the right training partners and the right parameter setups. One thing I've noticed, which seems to be a consistent theme with people who are successful in competition, is their ability to recall the right answer under pressure. How do you train to recall the right answer under pressure? Well, arguably position sparring. Position sparring I've seen with fresh opponents on the minute for 3-minute rounds is a really interesting way of recalling the right information across a variety of body types. It gives you a bit of a struggle to catch your air, but like you say, it's 3 minutes. You could probably do another opponent if you had to. The intensity is set similarly to what you were describing there with the conditioning side of things.
The difficulty there is that sometimes if you do add that fourth opponent, it might add that extra level of stress to the point where then you're so scrambly that you focus so much on that one, you forget what happened in the first three.
Right. Yeah. That's the tipping point, right? And I guess that's why they keep it to the threes there, because then you can recover and then you can change the position after a few minutes rest and then go again. And I really like those approaches where you're using the mat, you're using your skill set, you're using your problem solving, but you're also getting the lungs to work. I remember years ago I put up something just out of like a bit of a gamble really, of getting my heart rate up to 160 on the Airdyne bike and then immediately jumping off the bike and then trying to do back escapes. And I remember that was one of the first things I think we had an interaction with on Instagram, ideas wise. And because I was entering a competition that had EBI rules as the overtime, and I was like, well, the likelihood of me going into the overtime with a heart rate of anything less than 160 is minimal, so I might as well spike it and then see if I can recall the information. And it was a great experiment because it showed me just how difficult it is to recall stuff when you're tired. Your library reduces by about 2/3, I feel.
Yeah. Something that I heard that Shanji Ribeiro, Saulo Ribeiro, and Rafael Lovato Jr. do. So they obviously train together a lot at Six Blades and their other training places. So one of the things they used to do is between the three of them, they would always spar in a rotation. So one person was always resting. And the one person who was resting would be on an assault bike and would be mimicking the actions going on in the match. So they'd be riding quite casually. And if somebody shot a takedown, they'd scramble on the bike. If somebody was scrambling for position, they'd scramble on the bike. They would try to mimic the heart rate actions of the fight on the assault bike. Now that's obviously not everybody has the opportunity to do that. We're quite lucky at Elements. We've got an Echo bike in the gym, so you can sit on the Echo bike and you can ride that in your rest rounds. And if you're lazy like me, you just sit there and you just tick over. But you could, if you wanted to, figure out which one of the matches on the mats is going to be the most scrambly, and it's probably the two guys in no-gi, who one of them's probably got a cauliflower ear, and then you watch them. Whenever they do something crazy, you put your foot down and you go hell for leather on the bike, and then you back off again when they back off, because again it's kind of specific but without actually doing jiu-jitsu.
Interesting. That's quite cool. Yeah, I quite like that. Haven't heard of that one before. And you mentioned Gordon Ryan earlier, and I actually had him on my list here to talk to you because this is a fascinating outlier in so many ways. In so many ways, and obviously his most recent performance with against Pena showed that he was, absolutely fine and didn't even seem like he was trying for the first half, which seems to be a common theme in his matches. But you correctly stated earlier that he does follow a bodybuilding style workout where basically everything is 4 sets of 20. I'm pretty sure he's backing it with gear. I'm pretty sure his missus has influenced that training structure from her IFBB days in Brazil as being a bodybuilder competitor. I'm pretty sure she's educated him on the whole process or has put him in touch with various Brazilian supplement manufacturers to do it. But he breaks the rules in terms of S&C, or does he? And I wanted to pick your brains on this. Like, is he doing just hypertrophy-based workouts, bodybuilding style workouts, which is just like, imagine if he did proper S&C training? Or is he actually catering to his slow twitch muscle fiber type as a self-confessed non-athletic athlete? And is he doing himself a favor by training in that fashion? What's your kind of take on that?
I think initially his main reason, as you said, the main reason he first started doing that type of training is because in one of his previous matches against Penna, it was pointed out that he was a significant amount lighter, and then he was getting older. Like he was still quite young at that point, and is still quite young now, to be honest. So he was still figuring out where his physicality lies and where his potential lies from a physical standpoint. So he was like, right, I need to get heavier. How do I get heavier and make that weight useful? I put on muscle mass. What's the best way to put on muscle mass? Do a hypertrophy based training program. And then is he not? We all have our opinions. I'm of the same opinion as you, in which he probably is doing something a little untoward, but nobody gets drug tested in BJJ. So who cares? He's not necessarily breaking any rules. So let him do what he wants. Now, in terms of the S&C itself, he's so bloody good at jiu-jitsu, I don't think it matters what he does.
Agreed.
So he could be doing like, standing on a Bosu ball, bicep curling dumbbells whilst having a kettlebell hanging from a towel dangling out of his teeth, and he'd probably still be the best in the world because he's just absolutely categorically obsessed with being the best at jiu-jitsu. So could he be better by doing a more structured program? Probably. But does he need to be? Probably not, because he's already the best. So who cares? Now, in terms of the other question, I've never thought about it that way. And that's a really interesting point about, is he training to his already somewhat predetermined physiological status of being somewhat slow twitch? And I mean, possibly. Do I think he's doing that purposefully? Probably not. I don't think he's necessarily thought it through in as much depth as you have. I think he's just found something which helped him get the result he wanted, which was getting bigger, looking jacked. Now he's even more marketable than he already was.
Yeah.
So he just has a better product to sell than he already did. He was already the best in the world, and now he's the best in the world on the mat and looks really good off it. So why wouldn't you want to be his sponsor?
Yeah, totally. And we've got to take the endorsements into account for professional athletes and their visual, their looks. GSP put it pretty succinctly that the reason he started lifting weights was so that he could be more marketable. And it was only later on he came round to the idea of S&C. So there is that to it. But I'm fascinated if, ironically, he's chosen the perfect training method for his body type without even fucking realizing it. Because it's so interesting. He doesn't run, he doesn't do cardio, he doesn't do conditioning, he doesn't do stretching. I don't think. I don't even think he does yoga. I think he's literally does 4 by 20 on sort of one or two muscle groups at a time and works his way around like a bodybuilder split. And I wonder if that is just perfect for him because it just builds, if anything, localized muscular endurance, perhaps in the muscles that he's using often, backed by the fact he's so technically proficient that, even if he is a bit sore, even if he has got a bit of DOMS, even if he is a bit flooded with metabolites and waste from the day before, doesn't really detriment his performance because he's put in so many tens of thousands of hours on the mat. I do wonder.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. I'd honestly never thought about that before. But Yeah, I mean, he's not an explosive athlete, is it? You don't
He's
really see
not.
him.
I couldn't
No,
imagine him, Rob, doing a box jump, mate.
no,
Honestly, I couldn't. I'd actually, I'd think I'd wince. I think I'd wince because it's one
yeah,
of
I
those where I'm
think I
just
would
like, yeah,
too.
this guy is just not. Even when he wrestles, mate, he wrestles almost in slow motion. Like his underhook knee tap is like the reason I learned the underhook knee tap as a takedown because I was like, he can do it without any burst whatsoever. He is so technically sound in the setup and the mechanics that it doesn't need to be an explosive takedown. So he defies all the rules of kind of being having attributes, or let's say explosive attributes, in the realm of no-gi, and yet I wonder if his training is really just improving his localized muscular endurance because he can go. I mean, what did he do? He did 40 minutes with Pena, 45 minutes of non-stop. So
Yeah,
he obviously has gas tank. You know, he's efficient, and you've heard it before, I'm sure, as many people have. Like the way to get good cardio in jiu-jitsu is be more efficient with your movement, arguably. So you're not wasting energy, and I agree with that to a point. But he seems like he's so efficient at the gas tank actually isn't an issue. He's just building perhaps the localized endurance. I wonder, he's probably doing it like you say without even realizing it, but I wonder if it's just one of those fantastical synchronistic things where he's hit it perfectly maybe. And yeah, I guess we'll see. What I would like to see as just a thought experiment is him go with an S&C coach and see over the course of a year if doing a high performance program that isn't based around steroids and 4x20 has an effect. I would like to see that just as an experiment, and I couldn't really predict the answer one way or another. There's probably a lot of variables there, but I would love to see that.
yeah, so would I.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one. Right, questions from Instagram. I'm excited about this because I confessed to you earlier that no one's ever sent in questions to me on Instagram, but they have asked me when I've asked them, what would you like to hear about and who would you like to listen to? They've told me. But actually putting a poll out, so to speak, no one's ever done that. So I'm really stoked about this. So we got some. First one from Nathan. Thanks, Nathan, for sending this in. Appreciate that. If you had to condense a strength and conditioning session, and I presume let's just add a couple of definitions in here: condense, reduce the time frame of training in the gym. S&C session specifically for a hobbyist jiu-jitsu player. What exercises or training methods would you focus on? Why don't we take that across maybe a couple of phases? Off season, not competing. Hobbyist has got all the time in the world, nothing's on the calendar. And then why don't we take it to, we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but a hobbyist building up for a competition who's pressed for time, let's say they've got 30 minutes in the weight room. How would you condense it, and what exercises and training methods would you focus on?
First of all, it's a great question. So yeah, love that. I think main thing, I'm a big believer in training total body every session. I've never really taken much of a bodybuilding approach of doing like lower body day, upper body day. Occasionally do that with people, but very, very rarely. It's normally for me total body because it gives me more of an opportunity that if they plan to come in 3 times a week and then they only come in once because life gets in the way, then I know we've already trained everything. We've done enough to tick everything over. Plus less localized soreness, less opportunity to get injured, and more regular opportunity to make progress because you might do it 3 times a week. So I would start by saying you're going to do total body every time you come in. I would say ideally spend a little bit of that time getting properly warm. That warm up doesn't have to be sit on a cross trainer for 10 minutes or walk uphill very slowly on a treadmill, as everybody seems to like to do. It could be bear crawl 10 meters, then do a couple of sit throughs, then a different type of crawl on the other way back, like a Spider-Man crawl, and then a couple of push-ups and a couple of squat movements and some different dynamic mobility drills. It could be some kind of like dynamic mobility flow, like you can find on YouTube pretty easily. Things like that, where it gives people an opportunity to get warm by doing. So they're getting reps in whilst also doing their warm up. So something like that, say 5 minutes of just constant movement of any kind. And then I'd go into big main strength movement for the day. Ordinarily for me, that's going to be your lower body work because most people don't like to do it for some reason. I love it. Lower body is my favorite. So get that in first because research suggests it has a better growth hormone response and a better testosterone response if you do it first. So that's always a plus. Plus, it's always best to do the thing you're most likely to skip if you do it first. So get it out of the way. Big, heavy, lower body movement. Mine, ordinarily, I go to is a trap bar deadlift because it has a really low barrier of entry. Anybody can pretty much do that exercise. So go in, load up to like a heavy set of 5 or a couple of heavy sets if you've got time, and then do some kind of superset or triple set where you're getting a push, a pull, some kind of trunk, or some kind of carry, and then just work through that 5-10 minutes, get as many rounds in as you can. You'll get a little bit of a conditioning effect. You'll cover all the bases for push, pull, trunk, and then if you've got time in your rest periods between trap bar, you could do some neck work, something like that. Just cover all the bases and you can crack through it pretty quickly, because it ultimately doesn't have to be as complicated as everybody makes it seem. Just get in, move a bit, pick up something heavy, carry something, push, pull, hinge, job done. Then working through the phases, if that were off season, I'd probably place more emphasis on the strength work, do a couple more sets so you've got a little bit more volume. If you're getting closer to competition, probably only work up to one heavy set so you're not stressing the system too much. A little bit more time on kind of like the conditioning-y triple set type setup, so you're getting a little bit more heart rate response and a little bit less muscular damage is probably the way I would approach it.
Very nice.
And then if you've got multiple opportunities a week, then vary up the patterns. So if you're doing a trap bar deadlift day 1, maybe do more of a hinge pattern on the second day, something that's going to put more emphasis on your posterior chain. And then maybe if you get a third opportunity, do some kind of unilateral movement, some single leg, some single arm, something where you're going to get a little bit of better balance left versus right.
Yeah, very nice. Wow, you can get a shitload done in 30 to 40 minutes like that for sure. And it can all be super useful. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered your question, Nathan. Take some notes, listen to that a few times and get in there, son. Let us know how you get on. As I like that. I really like that format. I really like chucking the network in between the rest times for trap bar as well. That's a great place to chuck it in there. Fantastic.
Yeah, I like trying to fill. Sorry to cut you off. I like trying to fill rest times with things that aren't going to impact the main lift. So if it's a trap bar, doing neck work's not going to bug you out. But if you do grip work or core work, it will.
Yes.
So say you were doing a bench press, then you could fill that with calf raises or like knee extensions or whatever. Something which is going to something where you might not otherwise have time for, but isn't going to negatively impact the exercise that you're actually training for.
Yeah, that's smart. And I think for just on that note, grapplers, if you're experiencing the lack of trap 2 and trap 3 work from being rounded over all the time, and you're finding yourself I don't know, you got some squats to do, or you got some single leg work to do, and chucking in some trap 2 or trap 3 work in there could pay some mileage, definitely. Okay, love that. That's a great answer. Thank you for that. Next one then from Danny we got here. Who's your favourite athlete that you train? And then I'd like to add a part B. Do you have a favourite category of athlete that you like to train?
I know this. Danny's one of my athletes.
I thought he might be. I was like, is Danny fishing? He's casting a few rods here. So I guess you've got to say Danny then.
He's desperately trying to get me to say that.
Oh, bless him.
But to be honest, he is one of my favourites because he knows what he wants. And that's my favourite type of athlete, is somebody who comes in with a clear goal, clear mindset of, okay, I know I need to get better at X. This is the outcome that I want. And then just leaves it up to me to produce the package of how we get there. That to me is the dream athlete. They're motivated. They know what they're after. They come in, they put their head down. They do what they're told, but they, like, within reason, they're willing to ask questions. They kind of want to know why. They're not just blindly following. And they actually put some real intensity into their training session. That's my ideal client. Now, in terms of what that looks like outside of that, what sport, all that kind of stuff, ultimately, I'm very varied. I have, like, Danny is a football player. He's American, so he probably calls it soccer. But I have jiu-jitsu athletes. I have MMA fighters, boxers, hockey players. What else? I've got a trampolining athlete. I've got a horse rider. I've got all sorts. So ultimately, the biggest thing for me is that they give a damn about what it is that they're doing. That's my favorite type of athlete.
Yeah, very cool. And so can they learn to understand what it is that they need, even if they don't come to you knowing that straight away? So could they be assessed by you, get through, and you could be like, okay, I suggest that we focus on ... and then they could put that in as right, I am here to get that ...
Yeah, exactly. So Danny, we actually had a really good explorative process. So we sat down and we looked at some of the things that he's good at from a football perspective, and then we put that into the weight room and we said, okay, let's have a look at some assessments. So we did some force velocity profiling, and my immediate thought when I looked at him was he's going to be an elastic athlete. He looks very springy. He's a relatively light frame, and he's quick. So I was like, he's going to be elastic. And then we did the force velocity profile, and it showed me the complete opposite. He's actually a strength-based athlete. So we're now, because of that, focusing more on making him more elastic to add that to his game. So yeah, like almost something. There's that old phrase, isn't there? Don't guess, assess. Because if you don't know what it is you're trying to work on, you're just blindly going into something without knowing where you're going or why.
Yeah, interesting. I guess some athletes do just have an understanding. They're like, I need to get more powerful. And you're like, well, actually, yeah, after looking at it, you're right, you do, and let's do it.
Yeah,
Whereas other people might be like, I don't know what it is that's missing, but I need something. And then I guess that's like you say, the explorative process. All right, well, let's figure out exactly then what that is, define it, and then get after it.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, fantastic. And then I guess there was one last question here. What are your goals for strength and conditioning? And I think this is prefaced around as a coach. What are your goals? I guess as in terms of it could be anything. I suppose in terms of contribution as a coach to the industry, or what are you trying to do with the industry in your own way for S&C?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, if like let's sort of look at it from two different perspectives. So the one perspective of for me working with an individual athlete, my main goal is to help improve their performance, their well-being, right? So that might not necessarily just be their physical performance, but it could also be their mental performance. Could be help them to have a better understanding of their weekly timetable so they can spend more time at home. Like I like to be quite holistic in that nature and give people a better understanding of the overall picture. Um, but then from a broader perspective, like you put there, um, so as I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, myself and my business partner Matt Dickens, um, we own a company called Ascend Performance, and our goal as Ascend is to essentially be the best strength and conditioning provider or the best athletic performance provider in the south of England and potentially wider. Like we want to be able to spread positive information about the industry, give people the information that they need to be able to inform their own decisions. Because neither of us, like, you know, obviously our job is coaching people, but we don't want to coach people for the rest of their lives. We like people to come to us to work with us for a period of time and then feel like they have the information they need to be able to go away and do it themselves because they're somewhat educated on the process. Um, and that gets underpinned at the youth level. We both work with young athletes and we like to educate them on the why as well as the how. Just give them the tools that they need to be able to go away and perform it. Now, obviously, you're going to get some athletes who just want to turn up, be told what to do, and crack on. And that's fine. You know, I have some athletes I work with for a very long period of time, once or twice a week, every week for months and months on end. Then that's absolutely fine. But realistically, for those people, it's just continuing to give them the best product we can, make them better as an individual, make them better as an athlete. And we hope to spread that wider into the bubble of starting with Sussex because that's where we're based. Making us the go-to provider for S&C in Sussex for all sports, and then spread that wider as we go and start to sort of have people recognise that we know what we're doing and we can help and contribute to the wider population.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a great bigger picture goal to have and to aspire to, mate. I think that's very plausible as well. It's very realistic and very doable. But on that note, just out of interest, one of the big barriers to entry, it seems, into people accepting S&C is actually knowing what the fuck it is. And there's an educational component that I come across so many times in the last 6, 7 years on my own journey, where it's like, how do you educate someone about something that they don't know that they need yet because they don't know what it is yet, and then let that transform into a lead or a business opportunity? Is it a case for you and your work with Ascend that you go around and it's an educational component first and it's literally explaining to people in somewhat layman terms what it is that can be they can benefit from by doing S&C. Do you have to do an educational component, or is it just a case of you can the education kind of speaks for itself once you're in there coaching and stuff?
It can be a tricky one because ultimately people don't know what they don't know. So a lot of the time you get people walk into the gym. So the gym where I work currently, you might get somebody walk in and say, I want to get fitter. And the person behind the desk will be like, cool, here are the business cards of all the people who work here. Take your pick. And a lot of the time they'll pick a regular personal trainer because sometimes it's cheaper. Sometimes they might have more readily available hours. They might have a larger clientele and they appear busy, whatever it is, right? That's often the way in for a lot of people is they start working with a personal trainer and they get some kind of results, but not necessarily the athletic results that they're looking for. And then they see somebody like myself, somebody like Matt, somebody like you in the gym doing stuff that looks a little bit different. And they're like, oh, actually, that looks more like what I need. But they don't necessarily know the first day they turn up that that's what they need because they've never seen it before. And that's where social media comes in. So Matt has got a pretty big presence on social media, more so than myself, but he shares less regularly. I try and share content every single day if I can, apart from some days because, the day of rest and all that. So the idea of my social media is to try and educate people, to give them an idea of what it is they should be looking for. Give them an idea that, okay, like, do you understand why rest is important? Do you understand why you should have a goal? Do you understand how to train for strength, how to train for conditioning, how to rest and recover properly? Because then those people might see that and think, oh, actually, this is the type of person I need to go with. Now, the other trouble with S&C is a lot of people see it as elitist because a lot of people who are just, say, a hobbyist in whatever sport it might be, they play Sunday league football, they might play cricket, they might play golf, they might do jiu-jitsu, whatever it is. They see somebody like me or you, and we say we're an athletic performance specialist or whatever we want to say. They might read that and be like, oh, well, I don't need that. I only play Sunday league. But realistically, the type of person I want to work with, the type of person you want to work with, is the person who gives a crap about their performance at whatever that thing is. So even if it's their performance at daily life, that's the type of person I want to work with, because and we're the type of person they should be working with, because we will help them to get better at that thing. Like that's ultimately the difference for me, is that they have a specific performance or health related goal. That's where strength and conditioning fits in. So if you are just a hobbyist, you're listening to this right now and you think, I don't need an S&C coach. And to be fair, maybe you don't. Maybe you do just need to go in and do some entry level stuff. That's absolutely fine. But you're never not in a position to take it on. Right? You can always be ready to work with somebody to improve your performance. It's just that it's not just for professional level athletes, because if that were the case, there'd be a lot less people in my job role, in your job role, doing the things that we do, because we'd be completely redundant training absolutely no one.
Yeah, that's very cool. People that have got a goal in mind based around performance, whether it's for life or their sport or their hobby of choice. Yeah, I really like that. That's true. That is a common denominator of people that I love to work with as well. So yeah, nailed that. Yeah, that's very cool. And then I guess on that note, Rob, if people do want to work with you, I know you're super busy chaps, you've got loads going on, but if people do want to know more, they do want to learn from your social media, they do want to perhaps get in touch with you for either stuff to do with Ascend or for coaching opportunities, how can they go about that?
Yeah, just reach out on any of the social media channels. So our Ascend website is www.ascendap.com. So it's Ascend Athlete Performance. Our Instagram is at Ascend. What is that one? At Ascend Athlete Performance, because Ascend AP was already taken and we're not able to get it back as much as we try. And then my own Instagram is at Rob_Nitman. That's probably the best one. I'm on that one every single day, so feel free to send some stuff through. Also on my bio there's loads of links to my website, where there's submission strength monthly training program for grapplers. There's online training options, and I've put together a discount code as well, which I'll give to you, Harry, which you can put in the show notes or whatever if people want to get a little bit of a bargain.
Brilliant.
And that'll just be the word Move Mind, just put that in at the checkout, and it'll give people 20% off. So, yeah, just reach out on Instagram is probably the best way. If not, then email, which is rob@ascendap.com.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll make sure we get that in the show notes then. Yeah, we'll get a little Move Mind code. Why not? So guys, if you're listening, get on that, and yeah, you'll be able to get all of that on the show notes in their usual places on the Move Mind website. Well, Rob, this has been a pleasure, mate. You cracked out about an hour and a half there, man. That was really good. I'm so glad we got a nice bit of audio there for everyone can hear your clear instructions on peaking and everything else. Yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on the show, mate. And yeah, let's not leave it so long next time. We'll get you on again.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And yeah, I'm absolutely keen to do it again whenever you want to.
Fantastic.